During this session, learners will explore the pervasive nature of disruptive innovation and analyze how it has changed the educational needs of the digital generations. Disruptive innovation is change that fundamentally alters the traditional, long-standing ways of doing things. Disruptive innovation transforms how we work, how we play, how we communicate, how we view our fellow citizens, and how we live the world around us. A disruptive innovation is an innovation that creates a new market and value network and eventually disrupts an existing market and value network, displacing established market leaders and alliances. The media industry is the perfect example to demonstrate disruptive innovation. In the 1980s and 90s, personal music consisted of disc tapes and Walkman. Now consumers use iPods and the iTunes Store to stream music at any time and in most cases anywhere. Blockbuster Video used to provide movie rentals to millions of members. However, Netflix, a service that was meant for movie junkies, exploded with DVDs in the mail and streaming movie services. Netflix grew and grew until all of a sudden they had a fertile market of easy media on demand. Blockbuster tried to adapt by offering services online, but it was too late and Blockbuster went out of business in 2014. This is disruptive innovation. Rest in peace Walkman, rest in peace CDs, rest in peace Blockbuster Video. The driving force behind disruptive innovation is the incredible technological development that is occurring in the world today. Disruptive innovation typically starts with a new product, but it quickly becomes much more than that. That's because the innovation results in a fundamental change in human behavior. Take the development of the iPhone, for example. Steve Jobs introduced the iPhone in 2007. The iPhone was an amazing new idea for a cell phone, but in addition to being a phone, it also had a number of other technologies as well as a new mobile operating system that allowed users to communicate with the device using voice and natural hand gestures. It was cool and fun to use, but would it change the world? In the beginning, it was hard to see the connections between this device and how people live their lives. But once people began using it, they discovered a whole bunch of new ways of doing old things. For example, since people carried their phones with them all the time, they started listening to music on them. This meant they no longer needed to also carry a Sony Walkman or Discman, or similar portable music device. As a result, sales of these devices quickly dropped to zero. Then people shifted to playing games on their iPhones. Consequently, the sales of portable game devices like the Nintendo Game Boy dropped dramatically. And then people started to watch videos on their iPhones. Very quickly, video stores began to lose business and disappear, and movie attendance dropped substantially. And people not only watched videos on their iPhones, but they also shot videos, which led to YouTube and a whole new era of video sharing. Meanwhile, the banking business was hit by the shift in people's behavior as they moved to doing online banking using their phones. Instead of checking the mail, writing out physical checks, and mailing them back to the company, a consumer can simply log into an account and transfer their payment through a phone call, the web, or through an app. Smartphones and digital tablets also caused a fundamental shift in the way people got news and information. As a result, most newspapers and magazines had to change. Now, a few years later, almost all newspapers and magazines have online editions, and many have stopped publishing printed versions altogether. When the iPhone was first released in 2007, Nokia, a Finnish company, was the world leader in cell phone design and sales. Since the introduction of the iPhone, Nokia has been in a steady decline. In fact, Microsoft bought Nokia a few years ago and almost immediately laid off more than 12,500 employees. At that time, the logging and paper industries were two of Finland's other big employers. They employed tens of thousands of workers. But 3 years after the introduction of the iPhone, Apple introduced the iPad and changed all that. Sales of newspapers and magazines around the world started to decline dramatically, which hit the Finnish paper industry very hard. As a result, tens of thousands of Finnish forest workers lost their jobs as dozens of paper mills closed forever. Disruptive innovation can disrupt successful businesses. If it can disrupt entire industries, if they can disrupt entire countries, don't assume that the same thing can't or won't happen to traditional education as well. Don't think that traditional education is going to continue to be immune to the global changes that are happening all around us, because it won't. Over the course of the next decade, the education system in the modern world will experience the very same profound and permanent disruption and reconfiguration that Amazon, iTunes, Google, and smartphones have brought to the respective industries. Now, it's important to understand that disruptive innovation ultimately is not a technological issue, it's a human issue. It may start with technological development, but as the ripples of impact grow, it changes people's lives and it forces us to do things in fundamentally new and different ways. And when it does that, it pushes us out of our comfort zones. Time to process. Take a few moments to think about and respond to these questions. How will the changes happening in our world, the technological, the societal, the socioeconomic changes, impact the lives of our students or in their experiences during their adult years? How do we need to modify our schools to help our students be successful in the world they will face in adulthood? Linear growth is predictable growth that increases in an expected progression. Exponential growth begins as an almost unobservable growth at the beginning. Then, towards the end of the progression, it explodes in growth. This growth pattern is exactly why the internet exploded into our lives. The internet has been around for 40 years with very little impact on the general public. But when the exponential growth kicked in, the world was absolutely engulfed in a tidal wave of information that seemed to appear almost overnight. That's the power of exponential growth. Once the doubling or tripling kicks in, look out because change will occur at breathtaking speeds. It's critical that you understand that this kind of growth has been behind almost all the disruptive change that we are experiencing in the latter part of the 20th century and the first part of the 21st century. And it will most certainly be behind almost all the disruptive change we experience in the near and distant future. Inventor and visionary Ray Kurzweil described it this way: with 30 linear steps, you get to 30. With 30 exponential steps, you get to 1 billion. The only way to deal with this kind of dramatic change is to constantly be looking to the future. We must always be trying to stay ahead of the curve. We must always be trying to lead, plan, and act with the future in mind. We must always be trying to detect new trends and project them out to their logical extension. And we must begin acting now to prepare to capitalize on the new opportunities and challenges that are coming our way. So as we examine the changes that are affecting education, and as we project those changes into the future, it's absolutely critical that we continually be asking ourselves, are we using linear thinking or are we using exponential thinking when we project what the future holds? There has been a multitude of innovations whose ripples of impact have and are moving through our lives. We don't have time to look at them all, so let's focus on some of the developments that are impacting what we do in schools. We want to concentrate on two trends. The first is how information in the modern world is changing what educators need to emphasize in their teaching. The second is what's happening in the world of work and what that means for us in education. The first trend we want to focus on is what we call hyperinformation. This trend affects teachers directly because so much of education involves information. First of all, there's a lot more information than ever before. That's because more than 90% of the scientists who have ever lived in all of human history are alive today. And the amount of research and innovation that's being done has expanded exponentially as a result of all these people doing their work. Add to this the rapid explosion of the internet into our lives and the emergence of powerful new digital technologies. So now what happens is this new research and innovation information becomes instantly available to anyone, anywhere on the planet. Also, global networks give people access to news and information about everything from natural disasters to politics to sports instantaneously. Wikipedia is a good indicator of just how big this explosion of up-to-date information really is. Wikipedia was created in 2001. Since then, more than 6 million articles in 250 languages have been added to Wikipedia, and over 1 million new articles were posted to Wikipedia in the last year alone. 6 million articles are 1,000 volumes of 1,200 pages each, more than 1 million pages in all, or about 80 yards of shelf space. In March 2016 alone, there were more than 20 billion pages views on Wikipedia. And remember, Wikipedia is just one of many informational sites. There is Google, Yahoo, and Baidu, to name but a few. The amount of information in the world has quite literally exploded. To give you an idea of just how much information is now available in the online world, computer giant IBM tried to add up all the zeros and ones that make up all of the photos, videos, PDF files, emails, web pages, instant messages, phone calls, and other digital data. In 2012, there were more than 900 exabytes of digital data being generated in the world every single year. Just how big is 900 exabytes of information? According to our calculations, if you printed out all of that information in standard size books and piled them up, there would be so much data in 900 exabytes of information that the stack of books would extend into outer space. In fact, we've calculated this stack of book would extend all the way to the edge of the solar system, to that not really a planet anymore, Pluto. But wait a minute, not just one stack of books. 900 exabytes of data would be equivalent to 23 stacks of books that each reached from the Earth to Pluto every single year. By any measure, that is an absolutely overwhelming amount of information. And remember, this is based on projections of the amount of data that were made in 2012. That was more than 4 years ago. And remember, we live in exponential times, so how much data is there today? According to a recent IDC report, more than 90% of all the data in the world today was created in the past 2 years. Throw exponential development in the picture, and you get an idea of just absolutely staggering amounts of data that is available now and will be in the future. And today, it's not just about downloading content to computers. Disruptive innovation is providing us with amazing new tools for accessing the information. Smartphones, e-readers, tablets, and soon wearables, as well as the whole range of new digital devices that are capable of displaying multimedia information. These technologies will transform the way we learn about the world. To put this into perspective, when we were growing up, people read about what was happening often several days after it occurred. Learning what happened was a second-hand experience. Today, people can learn about things as they happen, whether it's a tsunami in Japan or an earthquake in Nepal, or a missing airliner in Malaysia, or a drought in Texas, or a bombing in Turkey. And they can experience the events with text, images, video, and sound, all at the same time. Not only that, but people can also see historical images, video footage, and historical audio recordings that have been converted to a digital format, which means that young people today can both learn about the current world and learn about history through first-hand experiences. And so, we must ask some critical questions about how to prepare our students for the world that awaits them once they leave us. What does it mean to be an educated person in the new world of hyperinformation? Does the tradition of a predominant focus on memorizing adequately prepare students for a world with anytime, anywhere access to more than 1 trillion web pages? What is the value of memorizing material when up-to-date data is available through intelligent online searching tools in a matter of seconds? And if memorization skills are not as in demand as they were in the past, what other skills do students need to have to be able to function in a world of hyperinformation? The second trend we want to discuss is the changing nature of work. This is a trend that many educators overlook because our days are so full dealing with the running of our classrooms and schools. That's why we rarely get the chance to lift our heads and look at what's happening in the world outside of the school system, and thus we often don't make the connection between school and careers. Thinking back to our childhood, it seems like when we all grew up, there was an incredible rhythm to life.
Typically, our fathers would go to work and arrive home at the same time. Today, the world is very different. Disruptive innovation has fundamentally altered the working world to the point where it would probably be unrecognizable to the generations of the past. Let's look at what happened. For the longest time, right into the latter part of the 20th century, a primary driver of the modern economy was the factory job and factory mindset for work. This approach to life was so prevalent, so taken for granted, that even our schools were modeled on a factory approach to instruction. Some traditional elements of our school day: a bell system, just like a factory, rows of people, just like a factory, lunch shifts, just like a factory, separate subjects and tasks, just like a factory, focus on memorization and routine, just like a factory. But as we all know, these types of jobs have been disappearing from the economy for decades. Why? Because technological innovation has made it possible for this kind of work to be done by anybody, anywhere in the world. And where labor is the cheapest is not here, but in places like China, and today even cheaper places like Vietnam, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and other low-wage developing countries. All of these kinds of routine cognitive work do the same mental tasks over and over again. So this kind of work not only can, but is being outsourced. Because we live in a hyper-connected, hyper-disrupted world, routine cognitive workers must not only compete with people in the next city or region or state or province, they also have to compete with an extensive global labor pool of inexpensive workers. This new workplace reality is called the gig economy. There has been a shift in the work world to include many more part-time freelance, elance, on-demand, and contract employment, and to include fewer of the full-time jobs that have traditionally been the foundations of the middle class. But here's another trend that we must consider when looking at the world of work. Work is not only being outsourced and offshored, but it is also being automated. For example, every time we use Expedia or some other travel site to make a hotel reservation, or anytime you purchase an airline ticket over the internet, or anytime you drop your mortgage numbers into a web form, you have unintentionally and unconsciously taken away some frontline routine cognitive worker's job. Think about legal software. Think of tax preparation. Think of online retail. If a job or a task can be reduced to a mathematical algorithm, it's easy to produce robots, microchips, and software that will do the job cheaper and faster. And when that happens, that segment of the job, or even the entire job itself, vanishes forever. Much of our education, from the bells that ring to the separate classes to memorization drills, were built to feed the assembly lines that powered the U.S. economy for the last century. But no more. Gone forever are the days where the 20% who were the managers told the 80% who were the workers what to do. And the 80% who were the workers were taught to never question authority. It's really important that we regularly stop and consider what this picture of the future means for what we are doing with our students right now. The problem is that while many educators recognize that there is a problem, our current educational system continues to promote traditional structures, promotes traditional organizations, promotes traditional teaching practices, promotes standardized content, and finally promotes standardized testing as the only way to assess learning for students. Today, our standardized schools are full of non-standardized learners, and this is happening at the same time that both the U.S. and the global economy have almost completely eliminated traditional standardized jobs. This perspective is particularly concerning when Richard Elmore's research indicates that between 80 to 85% of the work that students do in U.S. schools today is focused on factual recall and low-level procedural thinking. In other words, 80 to 85% of classroom work is focused on routine cognitive work, the work that is increasingly being cloud-sourced, outsourced, offshored, and automated, and disappearing forever from the economy. The problem is that the skills that are easiest to teach and easiest to test are now also the skills that are easiest to automate, digitize, and outsource. We need to stop thinking about success for our children only in terms of test scores that rely on teaching to a single correct answer, tests that only measure convergent and not divergent thinking. Today, the idea of the 40-year employee who spends the entire career working for one company is a complete novelty. In today's flat world, the new estimate is that today's generations of students anticipate having 10 to 17 or more careers. Not 10 to 17 jobs working in the same industry, but 10 to 17 distinct careers. And all this by the time they're 38 years old. Today, the average length of stay in any job for the digital generations is typically about 1.5 to 3 years. And please understand that having 10 to 17 or more careers by the time they're 38 years old is not a sign of failure or a lack of commitment or self discipline on the part of modern workers. What this reflects is a new economy and the new lifelong employment reality that all of our students are facing. In the light of this new global reality, as educators, we face the monumental challenge of bringing our schools into line with the realities of the modern world. No longer can we expect students to get everything they need for their entire lives by attending school once in their youth. Rather, we're now in an age where people must be learners for their entire lives. Today, we live in an educational world that's largely driven by content. We have standards and learning objectives. We have curriculum texts and pacing guides. We have a worksheet culture. We have high-stakes standardized tests, benchmark exams, and AP tests that drive instruction. They're all short life skills. These are skills that quickly cease to be relevant, particularly when you live in an age of disruptive innovation and hyperinformation. Education must prepare young people equally for life, work, and citizenship. For our students to be functional in the modern world and employable in the new economy, will require them to have fundamentally different skill sets than most of them leave our schools with today. In this world, increasingly, it's not knowledge, it's connectivity that's in demand. Students are our customers, they're our clients. For them, there are many new options for learning, and the most innovative do not even have the word school in them. Mobile devices have dropped a bomb of societal change on everything we do as a culture. People can now have all of their media in a single device that sits in the palm of their hand or in their pocket. As a result, they can connect with anyone, anytime, anywhere. Using big data will lead to the radical personalization and customization of learning tailored to the individual learner. Radical personalization is learning that is tailored to the individual learner. Many of the old generations outside of education just don't understand teaching and learning nowadays. There are many reasons why traditional organizations and institutions fail in the face of disruptive innovation. Failure happens because they're unaware of the changes going on around them, or they're unwilling to respond to those changes, or they're so mired in their organizational mindset that they're simply unable to change. The hope is that this presentation has addressed the first obstacle, because now you are aware of what's going on in the world outside of education and why it's so critical that we respond.